Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the pre-harvest and long-term weather forecast webinar this evening. My name is Jeff Minchin, and I work for the Riverine Local Land Services as the Mixed Farming Systems Officer based in Temora, and I will be your host for this evening. The response to today's event has been very positive, and we really appreciate your interest in the topic. And to be honest, who doesn't like to talk about the weather, particularly if you work in agriculture or a connected industry? The event is a collaboration between the New South Wales DPI and Local Land Services with the support from the Farm Business Resilience Program, funded through the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. Through the Farm Business Resilience Program, there will be a number of events over the next 8 months or so, covering an array of topics. And if you'd really like to keep up to date with what's going on and what's happening in your region, jump onto the website and register for the mailing list, and you'll be kept up to date. Just a quick an acknowledgement of country. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we're joining from today, we are on the lands of Aboriginal traditional owners. Here in Temora, I'm on the lands of the traditional owners of Wiradjuri country. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And just a little bit of housekeeping this evening. We will be using Slido to make the session this evening interactive. So please grab your smartphones and go to slido.com and then type in weather, and that will take you to the Slido session for this evening's event. We'll be running polls and a Q&A through this platform, and there will be time at the end for questions. So feel free to vote for other people's questions as they come up on that Slido platform if you like it, and that will actually raise it to the top of the questions list. As you put your questions in, if you pop in your location, it would be really helpful just to give us an idea of where people are from, and may help to localise the answers that you received from Karl this evening. Further from that, tonight's event will be recorded, and it will be available online in the next few weeks, so people can revisit it or share it with your colleagues. A link to this will be emailed to you once it is available and promoted through our normal communication channels and social media. So just a few Slido questions coming up there. Have you started harvest yet? Be very keen to see how many people in the audience have started or are very close to. And yes, if you just put your responses in there, that'd be really great. Just a quick introduction for our speaker tonight, Mr. Karl Lijnders from Weather Matters. Karl has been involved in the Australian weather community for 2 decades, from being heavily involved in the early days with Weather Zone through to launching his own weather forum, the Australian Weather Forum, back in the early 2000s. Karl has been providing forecast analysis privately for nearly 20 years. And in recent years, Karl has worked in regional media space, offering weather commentary on radio, television and print right throughout Australia. Most recently, you would recognise Karl from his role as a news anchor and chief meteorologist on Prime 7. And Karl currently runs his own private weather consulting and subscription-based weather service, Weather Matters, with Karl providing weather analysis for farmers right around the nation. So if you haven't already, grab your phone and log into Slido so that you can interact tonight and pop your questions in as we go along. And also, there's some early questions there. What's your expected yield for harvest this year? Be very keen to hear some results there, as for a lot of people, particularly down here in the Riverine, it will be one of the better harvests we've seen on the back of a really good one from last year. So without any further ado, maybe we'll get Karl, and welcome, Karl.
Well, good evening, everybody. I hope you're well. And thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you, team, for having me be a part of this, this new program. I think it's really important and really feeds into the space of where I'm working now. And I know a lot of you would have recognized me from my time at Prime 7, and it was a great time at Prime 7, but this is what I'm called to do, and it's certainly an honor to be able to help you guys out and just understand what's happening, not just in the short and medium term, but the longer term. It's certainly going to be a spectacular, crazy amount of weather in the next, well, probably 2 to 4 weeks. We're starting to feel it now, but certainly ramping up in the next 2 to 4 weeks, just as we're going into the harvest season. I've been talking about this a lot on my website since about July about how tricky it's going to be through the coming 2 to 4 weeks now, and particularly given how much rainfall we're expected to see, as well as severe weather. So we'll go through that, and we'll start with my little presentation. Now, I'm very good at weather, but at technology, I'm not very good. So let me see if I can bring this up for you. And I'm going to start the slideshow if it lets me. There we go. Look at that. It's amazing work. Okay, you can find me at weathermatters.org. That's where you can find all the information. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So let's get straight into it. Starting with harvest and weather, I like to always build up to the longer term. So we'll start with the short term. We know exactly what's going on. But again, just a rule to remember with everything to do with weather, science, particularly natural sciences, the further you go out, the less reliable the data gets. So the forecasts become less refined. So we're talking in broader terms as we go further out. But let's start with the shorter term now. And again, we'll start with this slide. And I just want to point out again that a lot of people love models. We love the models. Every model you can think of, people will quote them to me saying, this one's better and this one's better. Look, the greatest model that's out there with the strongest skill score, the highest skill score, is the European model. That is your dead set best one that is out there, but it's not perfect, and no model is perfect. It is an idea that is put on the table. So it has broader data sets, better grid data resolution. So your apps like the YR.no and your weather.us and all those other products that you use, they use the European model. But again, it is not perfect. So again, I just wanted to put that out there before we move forward. Let's start with the short-term forecast as we go through the headlines this week. Obviously, thundery and unsettled this week. We've got the chance of severe weather developing, and we've started to see that unfold over the last 12 hours with some heavy falls out through parts of upper western New South Wales. I think Mount Jack is sitting on around 70 millimetres of rain in the last 18 hours. So we're looking at 3 months worth of rainfall in isolated pockets, which is very normal when you're dealing with thunderstorm air masses like we are today. Broad rain is now starting to shift in towards the east. We've got very high humidity values and high chance of above average rainfall this week. And the cooler spring continues. And we are starting to see the troughs, the greater synoptic scale. We're starting to see the troughs being held up now over the eastern inland parts of New South Wales. And you can see the repeated flow pattern that's taking on over the course of the next 10 days. So repeated cycles of moisture coming down from the northwest of the nation through towards the southeast as well. And you can see a large scale system, this one here, that is developing for mid to late next week. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but this one has the potential to produce significant damage, particularly from heavy rain, severe thunderstorms, large hail, and damaging winds. So we'll keep an eye on this little buddy here because it has got the risk of severe weather. But in the short term, again, soupy air mass, rain and storms tomorrow, some heavy falls possible from the ACT, the Southern Highlands, up and through the Central Ranges, the Central West, up and through Southern Queensland. And that will progress very slowly to the east. See another trough out in the west. That comes through probably through the weekend. Again, we'll keep an eye on the instability values because I do think we're going to see significant rainfall with that one as well, potentially some severe weather as well. So this is a European solution. And again, this morning's run had the low going out to sea next week to the north. So central and northern New South Wales would pick up the bulk of the severe weather. But in tonight's run, I've just had a look at that in the last hour. That's brought the low back down through to the south. So everybody up through, well, right throughout the southeast should be paying attention to the forecast as we move forward. The moisture content, absolutely right off the charts this time of year. I've been following weather a long time, and I don't think I've seen such values coming down the pipe from the northern tropics as I am right now for about 10 years. So we are looking at some very, very heavy rainfall totals expected. That sees an increase in thunderstorm and severe weather events. This week, the showers and thunderstorms have already begun to flare up in response to that. And we've seen that with the rainfall totals in the upper western district. That'll be reflected tomorrow with some heavier falls about, and that trough will then move east, and another one will meet that over the weekend and next week. Again, the precipitable water anomalies very, very elevated levels. Now, the blue shading is nothing to sneeze at any given time, but when you see such widespread values, and we're talking about values in this northern pocket here, now this is the build-up. So this is the engine room for where we are going to be starting to see some really intense rainfall events starting to develop from. We can already see it coming through the outback, and the outback is the engine room for the heat, but it's also the engine room for rain events throughout springtime. And because we have got a negative Indian Ocean dipole, that is still peaking at the moment, it will wane, but we are starting to see that influence come down from northwest, southeast, repeated cycles, and we can see that low pressure system, the 10-day range, and that's something we are going to have to keep an eye on at this stage. That has got a very, very nasty look to it. So again, for those areas in New South Wales and your friends, if you've got friends in Victoria and Queensland, pay attention to the forecasts. So again, major rainfall data, well, the rainfall rather, for major global data sets from this morning, and I'd like putting them side by side. We've got the European, we've got the GFS here, and got the CMC. I always like the CMC as an outlier. It's a sister model to the GFS. All models are going through the same rainfall bias. The further east you go, the wetter it will be. And that's covering a large part of New South Wales. If this does verify, any of these solutions verify, many areas will likely see 1 to maybe even 2 months worth of rain in the next 10 days. So we are looking at the European at the moment. This is a closer look at your values in millimetres. So Dubbo here, 73 millimetres. That was this morning's run. It will bounce around. But again, it's just giving you an idea of the really heavy totals. Down through the Riverine, we're looking at totals between 40 and 80 millimetres. Along the east coast, between 30 and 70 millimetres. And again, a lot of these totals probably not reflective of the potential with thunderstorms. Some of these totals could exceed 100 millimetres. And just for reference, we have seen some heavier falls out through parts of the area shaded in blue today. So again, it's not an absolute, it is a guide. So again, you can get heavier falls in areas that are shaded in blue. So these models are not absolute, it is a guide. So really heavy rainfall. This is the GFS from this morning, and this is the CMC. So again, really highlighting the point that the further east you go, the wetter you will be. So this is my rainfall outlook for the next 10 days. This was prepared this evening, and you can see that rainfall bias now. This is a curated forecast of heavier rainfall up and down the Great Dividing Range. Really heavy smear just to the west of Canberra, down through northeastern Victoria. Could spark some flooding concerns in the short term, and some lighter falls towards the northwest. Thunderstorm forecast, again, we've got thunderstorms in the outlook period. This is a chance of thunderstorms occurring, a percentage chance within 30 kilometres of a given point tomorrow. And we can see there's a high risk through parts of the central west. And the main risk tomorrow is the flash flood risk, the high moisture content. That means that what comes up will come down. It is heavily stratiform out there. That means we can't really see the thunderstorm structure, but when it rains, it will rain absolute cats and dogs. And we've seen that through parts of central Victoria tonight with near 40 millimetres in Bendigo, which is now currently sitting under the severe thunderstorm warning a little bit further west. So we should see some falls like that reflected throughout the region, particularly west of the Divide in New South Wales tomorrow. Damaging wind risk up to the north tomorrow with the higher heat values, and that large hail risk won't be with us tomorrow. I do think we'll see it out through Queensland just because of the humid air throughout the nation. And just moving ahead to the weekend very briefly, from Friday through Saturday and Sunday, the severe thunderstorm outlook and particularly severe weather outlook on Friday still has the high risk of some flash flooding in parts of eastern New South Wales with that first trough. As we track through Saturday, there's the next trough coming through. We dry out a little bit over the eastern inland, but just keep an eye on that because Sunday we've got another belt of severe weather. A 60% chance of severe weather developing within 30 kilometres of a given point over a wide area of New South Wales. And I think on Sunday, again, the flash flood risk and damaging wind risk will be a concern. All right, let's head into the medium-term forecast. This is looking out to 16 days now. So we'll run the GFS again. And this is from this morning. It has updated again this evening. But again, no real changes to the synoptic flow this evening. I've just taken a look at that data. Again, really unsettled conditions developing with that secondary system coming out of WA. So I want to highlight this upper low here. All the moisture that's coming in from the tropics. We saw that before. There's our lead system from the weekend out the door. Now, watch what happens as we go through the outlook period. We've got a really deep low. That's a 993 millibar or hectopascal low pressure system tapping into some really rich moisture that's sitting over the northern parts of the continent. Now, the models don't refine this quite well, but we will see some really big rainfall totals coming into western and northern parts of New South Wales coming up mid to late next week. And as you can see, That is cause for concern after 2 bouts of really high humidity, heavy rainfall, and severe weather. We are looking at the chances of some pretty nasty weather in the next week or so, and into the 2-week period as well. So we see it clear out, but then more moisture comes back in for mid to late month. So let's look at the precipitable water values of the pivotal weather. And I like this product because it shows the synoptic flow with the moisture. You can see the circulation, the constant conveyor belt I keep talking about on the website, this constant circle of it just cannot be cleared out. So that means we get maybe 1 or 2 dry days through the next 4 weeks, and then it's populated again with showers and storms and a really soupy air mass coming down from the north. And these values are in excess of 1 to 1.5 inches above normal. So really, really rich air for heavy rainfall and severe weather. As you can see, it comes a bit more organized mid to late next week. And again, just keeping an eye on that upper low, dragging in that moisture again from the Indian Ocean through the interior, wraps it in, and then it clears out. But again, there's the Indian Ocean dipole playing its part as we see more moisture develop into the future. So let's have a look at what's actually available. Now, I like this product because it shows what the atmosphere is able to produce. And we've seen this today with the heavy rainfall out through northwestern New South Wales, where that's moving east over the course of the next 12 hours, 18 hours, and we see it dry out. And again, through the outlook period, we just cannot seem to shake that moisture out through northern areas. So if you're living in northern parts of New South Wales, not much of a break through the outlook period. And these values of red shading is in excess of 2 inches of precipitable water. So 50 millimeters of rainfall will come down in quick time if thunderstorms do form. So again, northern New South Wales, the central west, down through to maybe even the Riverine for a good extended period of time. The southern areas will clear out a little bit. The coastal fringe, really moist. We may get a little break maybe around the 18th or 19th of November, and then things start to become quite unsettled again. So this is the rainfall of the next 16 days of the deterministic, the single run data of the GFS showing excessive rainfall totals. The brown shading here is in excess of 150 to 200 millimeters just to the west of Canberra along the ranges. On the coast, you're looking at 50 to 100 if this is correct. But I will just point out the blotchy nature of the rainfall. That means it's uneven. So you're going to see some areas get absolutely trounced, and some of you get absolutely nothing. So you may get 10 millimeters, but your friend down the road, maybe 10 kilometers away, may get 40 at the same time. It's just one of those atmospheres. But again, over the next 16 days, many people should get a decent drop of rainfall, whether you want it or not. It's just going to be one of those atmospheres, I'm afraid. So the deep tropical moisture, the moisture to watch this week, I just outlined. I use these products a lot on my page, and they seem to be quite useful just being able to spell it out. That's the moisture watch this week. The nation is caked in moisture next week, a really soupy air mass taking us through from the 10th to the 18th of November. We're going to have to watch the nation very closely because a lot of moisture is going to be heading from the northwest through to the southeast. So rainfall for the period November 10 to 17th, showing that bullseye through the southeast, rainfall totals in excess of 60, maybe 80 millimeters in that period within this zone, but your number will vary. And as you can see, you've got some lighter rainfall expected over northwestern areas, but this changes on a daily basis. So I continue to update as much as possible because old information in the weather world is bad information. And so we try and keep you up to date as much as possible through this time to make some really important decisions. Rainfall anomalies over the next 2 weeks are really high. We're looking at near certainty of above average rainfall through the northern parts of the nation. But again, wanting to point out that Indian Ocean dipole influence, that northwest to southeast contour coming into the ranges of New South Wales and the ACT, northeast and Victoria, that's where you're going to see the elevated rainfall totals. I do suspect we'll have some elevated rainfall totals once we get easterly winds onto the eastern seaboard. The positive SAM mode will be in phase, so we'll see easterly winds develop with high pressure to the west of New Zealand, again, adding more moisture to our already saturated atmosphere. So again, we're just surrounded by weather systems that are going to create us with a lot of problems, I do suspect, through our harvest into early December. We'll get to that in just a moment too. Temperatures, people don't necessarily want to know too much about temperatures, but I like to highlight it anyway. We're looking at a cooler phase coming up next week, probably later next week into the third week of November. Not too cold this week. We've got a soupy air mass will become quite stuck. So we'll keep an eye on the trends on weather matters. But overall, it's looking like a soupy, humid air mass over the east. So this week, we're looking at temperature anomalies marginally above average. But again, with the rainfall coming through tomorrow, this will be rendered back to neutral, 50% chance of being above and below. Watch this blue shading over the coming days. You're going to see this come into the eastern inland, and look what happens in the week from the 10th to the 17th. Well below average temperatures, thick cloud cover, particularly with that system coming from WA through South Australia and then over the eastern inland. So we're looking at well below average temperatures for the middle of the month. Not cold, below average. And I think that's really important to point out. It's cooler than normal, but higher moisture levels will make it feel very, very soupy and uncomfortable. It will be the weather that you can wear. All right, let's have a look at the harvest outlook from the 3rd of December through to the 19th, the 3rd of November through to the 19th of December. Liking to start out with the climate drivers. Now, the Indian Ocean Dipole, we've talked about that at length and at nauseum, and I think there's been a lot of information out there on social media pages about the influence. The Bureau's model has had it basically resolved and not in phase, but the international models have been really quite aggressive in bringing the peak of the Indian Ocean Dipole through our harvest. And that's actually what's verifying right now. The sea surface temperatures, the atmosphere has responded in a way that has alerted me to say that the phase is peaking. It will start to wane as we go through the end of November, as it usually does. The SAM is generally turning more positive and of neutral through the coming 2 to 4 weeks. It will chop and change like a wave, and it's very volatile in its ability to be tracked well ahead of time. But at this stage, it's neutral to positive. There's no real signal of a negative phase, which would dry out the southern and eastern parts of the nation. And we are trending La Nina, and that's been the biggest talking item, I guess, over the course of this year. A lot of people have been saying to me on the weather chats and, oh, why are you forecasting even a chance of La Nina? It's not possible. It's very possible. When you have one La Nina, you get a rebound event. And I've been told to eat my hat, and I won't eat my hat because La Nina is here. So I do suspect we'll probably have a La Nina event of some variety through the coming, summertime. How strong it gets, that's the question. We are already starting to see that reflected in our sea surface temperatures off the eastern seaboard at the moment. Looking at the CPC, the Climate Prediction Centre's dynamic models and the statistical models, just briefly, again, look, following the green, the blue, and the red line, they're your means of all the data sets that are available on this spaghetti plot. And I know some of you are quite familiar with this product, but again, I sort of followed these three lines. You can look at this back on the recording. You can see the dip here coming through around December, January, February, the peak around between now and about February, and then it starts to wane, but it's waning a little bit slower than last year's event. So that's interesting in itself. So the Bureau's model sits a lot more conservatively. The Bureau's model doesn't quite verify a full La Nina event. That sits somewhere up in this zone here. The international models are a lot better at predicting these events ahead of time. Now, the American agency NOAA has predicted this event about 3 months ahead of other international agencies, and it's been pretty bang on so far. So that's something to think about as we move forward. Sea surface temperatures, the Indian Ocean, the anomalies out towards the northwest of Australia. You can see that the warmer bias is continuing, but it is starting to wane, and that neutralise. It's the values over northern Australia, and if you're living in the Northern Territory, very humid conditions. You've had some storms starting to erupt. You can see through the Gulf of Carpentaria and the Coral Sea. Now, the Coral Sea representing that the La Nina phase may be already starting to unfold right now. So that temperature anomalies of maybe 1 to 2.5 degrees is playing a huge part of pumping moisture via the trade winds into northern Australia. And you can see the Indian Ocean Dipole. Again, the Bureau's model's been all over the shop. I think it's had it down as low as about 1.6 degrees below normal, and it's had it up here. So again, it's sitting at around just below the neutral phase. But again, it's a little bit lower than that. I do suspect it's probably down around the 1 degree below normal. So that's something to think about as we move forward. Sea surface temperatures of the Coral Sea, I'll just point that out. Very humid air. This will play a huge part in bringing moisture down into New South Wales through your summer months. And we saw that play out quick time over Christmas and then beyond with the flooding through the eastern seaboard. La Nina that developed last year, we had a lot of people saying, hey, it's not La Nina, it's not raining. Well, the La Nina develops, and then it's about 4 to 6 weeks lag time between the event developing and then you're getting the results on the eastern seaboard. So You're thinking about how much rain is forecast now in terms of the ocean influence and the sea surface temperatures for our harvest period. Well, we haven't even got the La Nina impacts affecting New South Wales just yet. So there is a lot of weather to get through, not just through harvest, but in summertime and autumn. The ENSO forecast from the Bureau, again, a lot more conservative as the models I've just shown you, but I suspect this will change and this will update in the coming week from the Bureau. So the influence, I just want to point out again, that moisture coming in from the trade winds, you can see it feeding in via the northeasterly flow into this trough. And that's why we're seeing rainfall now. That cycle will repeat constantly through the coming period, and the Indian Ocean dipole influencing the moisture coming in from the northwest into New South Wales, bringing in excessive rainfall through our harvest period. So the impacts of the moisture this week, and again, I'm showing you this week, but this is pretty much for the next 6 weeks. It could be, it's very high, high to very high over the course of the next week to 6 weeks. So again, if you've got crops in the ground, you have to think about your fungal issues, your diseases to crops, the brown rot, your downy mildews. It's going to be a really tricky time to try and keep things as dry as possible with excessive rainfall, high humidity, and warm temperatures. Even though we're the cooler bias coming up in the next fortnight, beyond then, it does turn quite soupy. And a closer look at the humidity risk for November, I prepared this chart earlier in the week. You can see the higher values right across New South Wales, pretty much right through the food bowl. And that's going to pose a huge issue for many people that are wanting just to get in, get their crops out and get it done with high humidity, high rainfall values in the coming 4 to 6 weeks. So the rainfall outlook nationally, let's start with that first. The further east you go, again, that rule has been pretty much in place most of this year. The wetter you'll be. Scattered thunderstorms to bring you the heavier rainfall. We've spoken about that in terms of what we've seen so far in the last, well, since about October. That's been the case, and it's mostly the case most warm seasons. The flash and riverine flooding is still a very high risk for southeastern areas, and that will continue along the divide as well. We've got flood warnings out along the Lachlan River at the moment. We've had flooding over through the Murrumbidgee at times, and points around the Peel, McIntyre rivers as well. We've seen quite a bit of rain through winter. The catchments have dried out, but that flood risk will increase. Moderate chance of above average rainfall out west with thunderstorm activity. We've seen that already today, so that's starting to verify, and the uneven distribution of rainfall does continue. So you can see for New South Wales, a closer view in that rainfall along the eastern seaboard, that will start to pick up through the course of this month. I do think we'll have some heavier rain, more likely for the end of the month as the winds turn more unstable and more humid with the northeast flow. The points west of the divide, your harvest zones, really wet weather right throughout, and that will continue even into December as well. The temperature outlook nationally, very quickly, we are seeing the rainfall play a huge part in bringing up the rainfall, the temperature bias down towards the cooler values through the food bowl, particularly west of the divide, and even points along the coast. It's a 50-50 chance you can get some cooler weather, but essentially not looking at a very hot spring, which I think is a relief for many people after we've had such ridiculous springs, and I've covered them off over the years. This is a much cooler season, and it's been a much cooler season nationally with the extra moisture and cloud cover. I want to talk about severe weather impacts as well, because we do suffer quite a deal with the severe weather, and we've seen that through October. Cooler, I mean, I had some video sent for me from Cooler with the hailstones the size of grapefruits in some parts, and that risk is expected to continue, that severe weather risk right through November. So you can see here the risk is obviously defined the further north and east you go through the storm corridor. It does taper off into the high values. Don't get so caught up on the beautiful colours here. It doesn't work like that. One storm is all it takes. And we've seen that in South Australia, where it's in a low categorised zone. And they had hailstones last week that ripped out and wiped out half the Barossa Valley and tomato crops through parts of that region. So again, it's just a rule of thumb. The further north and east you go, the more likely you are to see severe weather. And for most people who are watching this, you probably know that. Large hail risks for the state, particularly that northeastern corner, it is above average risk through the northern inland and New England, along the northern tablelands, and even towards the Sydney Basin and points west. That is above average risk, and even towards the ACT and southern areas. The one saving grace, I guess, I'm seeing in the current trends is that the atmosphere is so saturated. So even though we're seeing severe weather in the outlook periods, the column above our heads, right up into the 45,000 foot mark, it's just so humid. It's so saturated. So hail will become a lesser risk, I think, as we go along through the month, and it does particularly ease in December. That's my general rule, and that's what I've been forecasting for a while. The flash flood risk remains very high. I prepared this chart about a week ago. This very high risk could even be extended down even towards Echuca through Hay up to Timmabara. That's how much moisture is now being analysed in the modelling. So again, just be aware that the highest risk with this season's harvest is your flash flood risk and the moisture issues that you're going to be facing. Very high precipitable water values equals a higher risk of flash flooding. The damaging winds risk for November for New South Wales, very, very high. Again, we've seen tornado activity, not uncommon. A lot of people saying, they don't happen. They absolutely happen. We've all just got phones and we can take pictures of the sky now. So there's no surprises there. But again, the isolated tornado activity probably waning a little bit. The atmosphere is looking a little bit more linear. But again, with the system next week, I just want to point out again, just taking it back a step, because I know many people are getting into harvest, if not harvesting now. We are looking at the potential, if that low does come off through the 10th to the 17th of November, at a risk of tornadoes returning to forecast. So just a heads up there. I haven't actually forecast that in any of my other products at this stage, but I just looked at that chart before and just wanted to make that mention now. But the risk of damaging winds does continue as we get warmer through towards the end of November and into December as well. Now, this is probably the bigger concern as well. The riverine flood risk over the next 6 weeks does hold a high risk. I'm going to update this chart tomorrow for our members on Weather Matters, but this risk is going to be extended further west now, and it could cover the whole state, even to Western Victoria, because of the risk of the copious rainfall. Again, 70 millimetres out in the upper Western District in the last 18 hours. I mean, that's crazy when you're staring down the barrel of further rainfall events it becoming more frequent. So again, the risks will increase as we get more and more rainfall, but it could actually impact those low-lying properties, those ones going into harvest right now. So if you're living on a low-lying property, just have this in the back of your mind that, we could be dealing with some flash flooding, but if the flash flooding continues day after day within your catchment, riverine flooding will be a problem as well. So looking at minor to moderate flooding in those catchments that have already seen excessive rainfall so far this year. Now, this is the risk of crop disease over the next 6 weeks. No surprise here in this broad scale chart. A higher risk through the food bowl with that extra moisture, that extra rainfall, the higher humidity and the warmer temperatures. The medium risk extends right back in through to the vignerons of Adelaide and out through the Barossa Valley and up through towards the north. Excuse me, as I clicked the wrong thing. Okay, soil moisture. This product doesn't quite get shown enough. This is looking at the available moisture right now. This is today's analysis of the European model. And it shows the catchments have dried out, particularly through southeastern areas of the nation and out through the central west and points west. It's actually been quite dry of late. Yeah, a lot of areas out through the lower western around Broken Hill today only picked up 0.5 millimetre, while down the road between Broken Hill and Menindee, 20 millimetres fell. So it's just the luck of the draw. I just want to point out that if the rainfall does verify, the models are predicting an excessive amount of water to come down in the next, this is 10 days difference, okay? So this is a forecast for next Friday, the 12th of November, showing saturated catchments right through the eastern inland, through the southern inland, over all your crops at the moment. So I'm just going to take it back a step so you can see from today through to 10 days from now. So look at the end of next Friday. If the rainfall verifies, that is what we could be dealing with. So some flooding issues are a possibility, as well as very, very spreaded soils, particularly through those southeastern areas that are seeing flooding and up and down the eastern seaboard. So we'll keep an eye on that. That is certainly a developing story. Soil temperature, again, doesn't get spoken about enough. And I think, I'm looking out my window now at my garden, which is getting a bit dark out there, but my garden's about 2 weeks behind where it was last year, and then probably about 3 weeks behind. Now, I think that's a reflection right across the southeast and eastern parts of the nation that we are seeing temperatures a little bit cool through the soil mass at the moment, but it will start to warm up in the course of the rest of the month. But this warmer tone through Queensland's having a hard time to come down. The warming of the land is becoming more and more difficult because we're getting more and more rainfall and more cloud cover. So we will see a retarding of that soil warmth over the course of the next probably 2 to 4 weeks, maybe some better odds in December, seeing temperatures rise. Let's have a look at the summer outlook now. I think that we can move a little bit further ahead. La Nina, and I guess the La Nina summer is not a surprise to many people who follow weather. The data says, yes, it is likely to happen, but there's still it's a 91% chance of it happening, but there's still a 9% chance it won't happen, looking across all the data sets. So again, it's not a done deal, but it's getting very, very close to being declared by some of the international agencies. So again, that'll be a developing weather story to follow in your feeds over the next 2 to 4 weeks, and the Bureau will likely have more details on that officially, given they are the statutory authority on that matter. So the La Nina impacts, just very quickly for those who don't understand what that is, very quickly, increased risk of above average rainfall for southeast and eastern Australia. We can tick that one off. The early onset of the wet season up north, tick. We've seen that already. Above average wet season likely. Already got some above average totals up in the north. Increased risk of storm outbreaks. We've seen that already happen. More humidity, tick. Saying that. Less likely to have extreme heat waves. Well, we're starting to see a pretty cool bias so far through to early summer, and less likely to have severe bushfire season. And over the northern parts of New South Wales and northern rivers and through southeast Queensland, it was pretty much a benign season. So maybe we're already starting to see the La Nina impacts happening. So let's have a look at the data, the early set data from the climate models. Now, the CANSIPS is not a very good model when it comes to tropical rainfall, anywhere north of about, Annabella in Australia. So you can sort of discard this. What I'm interested in is the continual green shading we're getting here. It's a slight bias towards wetter than average values for our summertime through to February, but we are starting to see that La Nina impact in the Coral Sea. Again, it is not set in stone, but summertime's starting to carry on a bit of a wetter outlook. The European model, which I like to use a little bit more, it's a much more accurate model, as I've spoken about earlier. Strong signals for a damp season ahead. We can see that on the charts. And again, tropical influence being the major player again, and you can see that with the above average rainfall through northern Australia through our summertime. And the La Nina, again, hasn't been quite verified in this data set. Now, this was from October. The November outlook is expected to be delivered, I think, sometime this week. So I've latest details on that later on this week. But again, that is a very wet look coming off the back of a pretty wet summer. So for those guys, for you guys out there that are preparing your summer crops or hoping to not have many issues in terms of the moisture impacts on your crops, well, I think you're going to be dealing with a lot of rainfall and storm issues this summer, I'm afraid. And the summer outlook again shows a pretty wet bias for the nation, particularly the north and east as we go along. The southern coastline seeing neutral values, but it's that northern area, the engine room, that we will see particularly heavy rainfall emanate. So again, something to keep an eye on in the next few weeks with your climate outlooks. The summer temperature outlook, again, not seeing a really hot season for the 3 months. This is off the CANSIPS again, showing a little bit of a bias of below average temperatures, but it's with intolerance. So again, seasonal values right across the board. This is a European, very similar, high humidity, cooler bias. We're seeing right across the board. That's helping to keep temperatures down. And the cooler start to the summer will be in place. I think it could warm up though through the back half of January and February. So don't rule out some hotter weather coming your way in towards January and February. You get more details as we get closer to December. So my temperature outlook looks cold, but it's 60% chance of exceeding the value of temperatures over the course of summer. That's still within tolerance of a normal season. The bias is still existing through your eastern and western interior parts of the nation. Again, it's really conditional upon how much rainfall does come down. Now, very quick look at autumn as we move forward for anyone forward planning. Again, I like to use this chart, but we'll just reference the April, May, and June and April, May regions. Again, the mean of the models, again, showing that La Nina still lingering into the March and April, and then it neutralizes around the May. We'll keep an eye on that. That will refine as we get closer. But some of the statistical models and dynamic models together keep it going right through. That's an interesting signal. It didn't do that last year. So again, it's not impossible to have triple dip La Nina years, but I would be cautioning that idea. I think we'll probably look at a neutralizing period through autumn, looking at that. So my forecast reflects that. So the first glance at autumn at this stage, seasonal conditions for most of New South Wales. Again, a wetter bias the further north and east you go. We saw the flood issues up in northern New South Wales, particularly along the coast in the March and April, as La Nina was waning. Again, the energy from that event played out in February and March. We saw those record rainfall totals from about Port Macquarie through Bellambi, Coffs Harbour, Tweed Heads, and that region really flooded pretty heavily. I've got that rain bias just highlighted there because of that La Nina waning. The rest of the state, you're looking at a flip of a coin, I would suggest, particularly through the southern interior parts. And again, it will be dependent upon what happened to the Indian Ocean, because there are signals that we could be back to a negative Indian Ocean dipole next autumn into next winter on some of the climate models. So I'm keeping an eye on that. I'm not putting out a forecast just yet on that, but just some information for you out there if you're forward planning. And if that does become a negative phase earlier on in the season, we will start to see moisture being drawn down into the southeast, and these rainfall biases being above average will then seep southward. So at this stage has been conservative, but again, after a wet 6 months, I don't think we'll be needing any more rainfall, I can assure you. And the temperatures very quickly, no real bias either way. So we're looking at neutral values across the nation. That's normal. The further you go out, as I said, the more broad you can be with your forecast packages. But at this stage, not seeing any searing heat. However, I just want to point out before I finish that we are looking at the chance of a pretty warm end to summer and a pretty warm start to autumn if we see the La Nina phase wane quicker. If it lingers, if that La Nina is deeper and it lingers longer, we'll probably end up with a cooler, protracted, wetter start to autumn. So these are the things we need to sort of iron out as we get the data sets coming in. So I'm sure there's plenty of questions. I want to keep plenty of time for answers. About 15 minutes to go. So I want to answer as many questions as I possibly can here. And before I hand it back to Jeff, I will just say this, that if I can't answer it in a way that I think is broad enough, I'll grab your details and I'll try and get back to you on those questions. So thank you very much. And again, if you want more information, weathermatters.org is where you can find me. So Jeff, I'll hand it back to you now.
Great, thanks, Karl. Yeah, great summary. And I think a lot of the weather forecasters have been sort of hovering around that potential La Nina for a few months now.
Yeah.
Some of them are locking it down. Some of them are still hovering.
Yes.
Probably for a bit of experience on the ground out in the western areas, we have been dry for a little while, and I think we can handle some small amounts of rain. The 20 or 30, 40 mils we could handle, but obviously the bigger totals in your presentation, we're not probably going to like too much.
No, I don't think so. No.
So yeah, just a couple of quick questions, and this one might be a little bit out of your expertise, is around, are we looking at another mice plague going into next year or after this summer?
Well, they're always so hard to predict. It's like predicting when it's going to end. I mean, when I was doing the news, and I think it's using my news background now, but when I was doing the news, I think the biggest question I had doing regional radio is, when was it going to end and was it coming back? And looking at the science, there's no way of knowing. If we do get a wet year and there's plenty of feed on the ground, yeah, you're looking at probably a mice plague. But my biggest concern is that if we do get a very wet year, that we deal with a locust plague at some stage, not in this year, probably the next year or the year following. So there are things to think about, the pestilence side of things as well. We are looking at a potential for that to become an issue. So yeah, a great question. But again, those things are really hard to predict ahead of time, just like the weather. But those sort of things, there's no real rhyme or reason. So again, just keep an eye out, and again, report it to the departments to let them know what's happening on the ground, and hopefully the message can get out there, and hopefully we can actually get the stuff out there to mitigate it as quick as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think the best thing we can do is monitor both mice and locusts going forward. One thing we need to probably keep an eye on is if there is a bit of crop damage around it, that will put food on the ground for mice, and that may give them a source of something to eat. So that would be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
The next question I've got here is for cotton farmers, impact of watering and temperature. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's a very broad question. So let me just say this. There's going to be excessive rainfall. So if we're talking about, if that person was living in the northern parts of New South Wales, let's just say if that person can put a location, would be great. But let's just say, because there's a lot of cotton around the whole of New South Wales, it's going to be wet. It's going to be really wet. The temperatures I've just outlined, you're looking through summertime, really wet, humid. You will get warmer weather, but the bias again is for a cooler springs, cooler harvest, cooler start to summer, and then we see the temperatures starting just to elevate a little bit more, particularly if the La Nina phase wanes earlier. But the rainfall will keep ticking over until about February, and then we'll probably start to see it dry out just based off the current data sets. And the autumn up through northern and eastern New South Wales will still be quite wet, and it's usually the wettest time of year on the eastern seaboard anyway. But again, the Riverine will probably dry out a little bit quicker for you cotton growers there, but further north you go, it may take a little while to dry out, but there'll be a lot of water. The cotton may be looking okay. I think that's a good thing for cotton. You have to tell me.
Yeah, that is a good thing. The dams are full, particularly for the southern basin, 100% allocations, and for the northern part of the basin, a lot of dryland cotton this year, and so they'll be looking for summer rainfall for those crops.
Oh, that's good news.
Yeah. Another question we've got here is, given we have high biomass and a lot of moisture, what's your thoughts on bushfires come January, February, late summer period?
Yeah, again, the rule of thumb will be watching trends as we dry out. So again, connected to that La Nina phase, and I will call it La Nina anyway because I'm seeing it off the charts. I mean, it's a moot point. So again, the wetter we stay, obviously it's a suppression on that the bushfire risk. Now, I did issue charts and I probably forgot to put them in there, but the bushfire risk is quite low for the remainder of summer. If you show those charts on my webpage. So at this stage, for eastern New South Wales, you can stick a fork in the season, it's done. For southern areas in around the southern highlands, central tablelands, east of the divide to the coast, keep an eye on that drying phase through February. We'll keep an eye on the humidity values over northern Australia. If they start to retract and we start to get into drier, more subsidence air, sinking air motion, high pressure, then we can start to see that forest dry really quickly. But at this stage, I would be picking a pretty low risk season. However, the wild card is always the lightning strikes. So keep an eye on your properties with the lightning strikes just before the rain comes in, because with the high winds that are a risk around those thunderstorms and downbursts, fires can take off pretty quickly in any sort of season. So again, a low risk season right through Victoria, New South Wales, and into Queensland at this stage.
Yeah. Next question would be, what's your view on long-term rainfall patterns and how they're impacted by the climate change?
Yeah, so love the term climate change. It gets everybody really going, doesn't it? I just, it's like that answer. I'm gonna answer it anyway. Look, we are seeing a lot more moisture in the atmosphere. Now, with the warming of the atmosphere, if we are going to believe everything you want to believe about climate change, we are seeing more moisture that is available. The warmer the atmosphere, the more moisture the atmosphere can hold. So again, we are starting to see that reflected in what we are seeing right now out the window. I mean, I'm feeling it right now, looking out my window as it's starting to rain here. So a really dense, humid air mass is now becoming more available for longer periods of time through our wetter phases. So in our dry seasons, it's dry. Like the extreme drought we had back 2 years ago, which I covered off on Prime, that was right up there. So when it's dry, but when it's wet, there's more heat available, there's more moisture available, heavier rainfall. So the longer term rainfall patterns are much more erratic. So you're seeing the big troughs when we're getting the drier spells with the El Ninos, and those dry years, the positive IODs. When we get the negative IOD coupled with the La Nina, you get these huge amounts of moisture available, and you're seeing that reflected in the record rainfall through parts of WA, through the Northern Territory, and that is extending now down through South Australia. And you'll start to see that in our backyards in New South Wales. So again, prepare for, I guess, more erratic rainfall patterns into the future. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no one out there that can. There's a lot of great long-term forecasters, but there's nothing 100% about weather forecasting. I can assure you of that. I've been around long enough to know that there is no absolutes. But one thing I can tell you is that the weather is becoming more erratic, and it's keeping the model data it's making the model data really hard to follow. And we're seeing that even now. So, even in the short term, medium term, longer term forecast, the forecasts are becoming much more volatile through our wetter phases. And I think in the longer term, the years to come, I think we'll be dealing with even higher rainfall chances to go along. Oh, I'm just sorry. I've just decided to put my desk down. Okay, it's all right. So I think over the course of the next probably 6 months, we'll probably have a really wet phase. But in the terms of the dry weather coming back, it's going to get quite acute and quite dry. So for those forward planning, this 6 to 9 months will really tell a story about how much climate change is having on our rainfall, on the rainfall through our region. And I do think we'll see significant rainfall, record rainfall through parts of New South Wales. Where? I couldn't tell you that, but just be aware there will be record values through New South Wales again this season, as we saw last season on the eastern seaboard. So it's a long-winded way to answer the question, but again, more moisture in the atmosphere because the air is warmer. The warmer the air, the more moisture it can hold, heavier rainfall. I think that's the rule of thumb.
Yeah. Very comprehensive.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I think you see that in the models that, 3-4 weeks out, there's a lot of range in the models, and they sort of come to a consensus as you get closer to the time. What are your thoughts on how many East Coast lows this summer, autumn period?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Very tricky question to answer. Now, East Coast low season, for those who don't know, is between March and about July. And we saw that play out one year with the Pashabolka being floated and thrown aside. So that happens mainly through our autumn and our winter. But for summertime, East Coast lows, I don't classify them as an East Coast low. We'll answer this in two ways. East Coast troughs embedded in the easterly flow, probably a high chance, and that's what caused the significant flooding through northern rivers and the mid-north coast through last summer. So that was actually connected through more to a persistent easterly flow with East Coast troughs. So they will feature quite heavily from mid to late December and through to about March, April. So if you're living in the northern rivers, point inland to the Great Dividing Range down to about Newcastle, just have that in the back of your mind that it'll be above average season for East Coast troughs. In autumn, we transition to East Coast lows. Semantics. Again, the East Coast low circulations will become more of a feature probably as we see the La Nina wane. So once we get rid of that really soupy air and we start to see that wane and we get more dry air and colder air coming back up from the Southern Ocean, that's when we start to see that low pressure circulation start to develop off the eastern seaboard. And particularly if the waters are still warm off the East Coast, if we get the colder air in the upper atmosphere and get that cyclone genesis really going for it, that's where those East Coast lows can bomb, and that's when we get the rainfall. At this stage, it's a neutral signal for that. There's no great data pointing to any sort of below or above average. It'd be wrong for me to sort of say, yeah, you're going to get 8. It doesn't work like that. So just keep in the back of your mind, there's a neutral signal. There's not one way or the other at this stage.
Yeah. Great. Next question is, when a weather forecast indicates 90% chance of 20 millimetres, is that 90% chance of 20 millimetres or 90% chance of rain?
Okay. So if this is a Bureau forecast, when the weather forecast indicates 90% chance of 20 millimetres, it's not for 20 millimetres, it's 90% chance of rain falling, one drop in your head, and that's 90% chance of rain has occurred. Now, in terms of the total, now, for Canberra, for example, where I am, Ngunnawal country here in the ACT, Northern Canberra, my forecast tomorrow for the Bureau is 20 to 45 millimetres. So there's a 90% chance of rain. Yes, it's raining right now. And then there's there's a 50% chance of achieving 20 millimetres of rain. There's a 25% chance of achieving 45 millimetres of rain. So that's how they designate the different allocations there. So that's how that works. So in terms of the Bureau forecast, that's how that works. When I forecast rainfall, I forecast in ranges of, as you just saw in my product. So I always say there's always 2 numbers to look at, and there's always a bust number and there's always a boom number. The bust number in any forecast is a number that falls lower than what's forecast, and that really pisses a lot of people off, and I get a lot of flack for that. Sorry for the language, but that's what happens. And then you get the boom forecast, which is well above what was forecast. So Mount Jack, for example, had 5 to 15 millimetres forecast for yesterday. They got 70. No model had that. So that's a boom forecast. So you've got to work with what you've got. But again, remember, it's not a perfect science. So I hope that answers the question comprehensively.
Comprehensively, absolutely.
Great.
Next question here is, did you mention the MJO and its influence over the next 2 months?
No, I did not. And I didn't do that purposely because it's been quite indiscernible through the tropical areas, but it will have a major impact coming up through the next couple of months. I didn't want to go through every portion of that, but I will take that question on notice and I will give that person, I know it's an anonymous person, if they want to send the details through, I will answer that question for them a little later on, because I think it is an important one, but if I covered it off with everything else, we just wouldn't quite get through it all. But very quickly, the MJO will be playing a huge part. It will be in phase to be sending the monsoon trough further south a lot earlier this year. So those upper northwest winds will come through the tropical north, probably from before Christmas. And that monsoonal trough, I wouldn't be surprised seeing it draped across the continent from about Mackay through central parts, maybe as far south as Tennant Creek, even as far south as Port Hedland. So that will see a very wet look for the north of the nation, particularly with the first 1 or 2 bursts of the monsoon. So keep an eye on that trend. That will play a huge part in summer rainfall. And if that does happen, huge rainfall totals for the nation. And again, I haven't factored that into my climate outlooks because it's the wild card. It's the wild card system. But again, it's a very hard thing to predict ahead of time, but it will have a huge impact.
Yeah, good answer. Now this one is looking a bit further out. What's your outlook for the next 12 to 18 months?
Making me work tonight.
How's your crystal ball?
Who was it? So what was that? Get
How's
the crystal ball.
ball?
Oh, there's some have something to drink. Look, I think the next 12 months, I think will be seasonal to above average rainfall. Look, the next 6 months is wet. Let's head from autumn. Autumn looks seasonal. It's not making a decision. It's just what it is. I think winter will be seasonal as well. Looking at my latest analysis and all my sort of data that's been coming in, does seasonal outlook for winter at this stage, so no real wet bias. However, in the last week or so, I've started to see trends of a negative Indian Ocean dipole returning, and that does mean more moisture is lofted into the atmosphere. And I'll answer 2 questions here because I can see one below about the Indian Ocean dipole very quickly. That plays a huge part in winter and spring rainfall. So again, if it's negative, we get more moisture transported out of the warmer waters of the Indian Ocean south of Java and Indonesia, and you're seeing that on the satellite picture right now. So check the satellite picture and your precipitable water values, and you can see that moisture is lofted and then dragged into the south and east. Now, back to the first question. When you get the winter rainfall connected to the Indian Ocean dipole, it's going to be a wetter season. So at this stage, there's about a 30% chance of that developing. So at this stage, it's in the back of my mind, but it's a seasonal outlook for winter next year. Springtime is a split camp. So I've seen some going towards an El Nino, a drier phase. Now I'm starting to see more of a bias back towards seasonal to above average rainfall with the La Nina returning. So again, as we go further out, it is like throwing dart at a board blindfolded. So again, seasonal weather right through for the next 9 months, wetter for the first 6. Beyond then, it's anyone's guess.
Yep, great. So we've covered that next question there. We'll go to the one following. When you say below average temperatures over summer, is that 5 degrees or a larger 10-degree difference, or just
no? So below, it's a percentage. So the bar that I used below was a percentage bar, the chance of below average temperatures through a region. So at this stage, we are looking at below average temperatures for a large part of the nation, a slight bias. So in my charts I've showed you before, with 60% chance of a below average temperature smear across the nation. That doesn't mean cold. It could mean that the temperatures are about 0.5 to 1 degree below normal. Where the signal's stronger over eastern New South Wales through your spring and your summer, it could be 1 to 2 degrees below normal. But there will be periods where it's interspersed with warm, humid weather like we've got right now. And that will keep the overnight temperatures up. So your daytimes will be lower, but your overnights will be right above average because there's no real movement with a high humidity. So when the air's more humid, the temperature can't rise and fall freely. When it is drier, that's where you get your really high spikes and the really low lows and those really large thermal and those diurnal ranges. So at this stage, it is a modest chance of below average temperatures through summertime, but we will get more clarity probably in the next 2 weeks for the summer outlook.
Yeah, great. We'll just take one last question here is the old bush tale of if there's heavy rain in South Africa at a time, we can expect to see that sort of 6 to 8 weeks later. Is there any truth in that?
Well, yes and no. It depends on the upper airflow pattern. Now, I didn't go into great details on the Indian Ocean. I could have showed you that tonight. But the Indian Ocean dipole, the Indian Ocean itself has, it's such a vast expanse. And sometimes we get these long fetch northwest flows that can come across the top of a long wave pattern in the wintertime. And sometimes moisture from the tropical north, particularly through winter and springtime from the Indonesian region and through India, can be fed into those really northward facing cold fronts coming through the Southern Ocean, and sometimes the heavy rain that's on the eastern seaboard of Africa can sometimes be thrown into those cold fronts. So there is some connection, but again, most often not. It comes via Indonesia from the northwest through to the southeast. That's the general rule. But look, you never say never. I've seen it all in weathering. Look, in my time, some of those old bush tales are not so far from the truth. So. And not to mention the Indigenous stories and the amazing abilities of the Indigenous mobs I've worked with up in the Northern Territory for their ability to forecast weather well ahead of any computer data set I've seen. So my time in the Northern Territory, Jeff, has served me quite well, learning from some of the elders up there. It's been great.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of merit in some of that.
Amazing.
That knowledge.
Yeah, incredible.
So that's going to bring us almost to an end tonight. We've got a post-event survey that we'd really like the audience to be involved in. It helps us with our monitoring and evaluation, and helps us attract more funding to these sorts of programs. So if everyone who's still with us can jump into that survey and fill it out for us, that'd be great. just like to say thank you to Karl for a very comprehensive summary and weather forecast tonight. I really enjoyed it, and I've actually been a big fan and a big follower for a while, Karl. So thanks very much for you sharing your knowledge.
I'll send you to my GP. He's got some medication for you. It's lovely. Thank you.
Yes.
Very nice.
No worries. Thank you to all the participants tonight. I hope you've got some great information from Karl tonight, and it's maybe put some thoughts and planning into what's going to happen on your properties or you're planning for the summer as we go forward. And we're really grateful for your time to be with us tonight and listen to what we've got to be presented. Sorry about that. And we hope that the event tonight's met your expectation. With the post-event survey, you jump into Slido, slido.com, and then type in weather in the menu bar to access that post-event survey. If you'd like to do that, that would be excellent. And that's be us for tonight. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you.